Welcome to the panel discussion for today on Top Gun Teachers. My name is Dave Saba. I'm the CEO of the American Board for Certification of Teacher Excellence, ABCTE. Hope you all got a handout on the way in. We're going to dispense with the bio reading and hope that you all can read the bio at your leisure because we don't have all that much time and there's, I think, a lot to talk about today. But we do have a great panel up here, and hopefully we can generate some great discussion. I'm going to lead it off. If you've got your handout on the front there, I just wanted to kind of start off with some of the facts about alternative certification. When I came on with the American Board in 2001, alternative certification was still something that was a little difficult for people to wrap their heads around. It was not something that was in the mainstream. It wasn't something that people were eager to adopt. And here we are just 4 years later, and we're pretty much in the same place. But no, it's gotten much better. We actually have got more and more alternative certification programs going, and a lot of that has to do with the data that you see here, which has been gathered over the last 4 years, which really make the case for alternative certification. The first thing is that the National Council on Teaching in America's Future, NCTAF, came out with an analysis of our aging teaching workforce. And basically what they've come out with is over 50% of our teachers are baby boomers, and in less than a decade, 1.7 million of our 3.4 million teachers are going to retire. Okay? That is a huge impact, because a little further down on our page, it talks about in 1972, 23% of the bachelor's degrees in this country were earned in education. Today, that number's down to 7%. So we have all those baby boomers that came in 1972 now moving through the system and leaving. Now, a lot of them have delayed their retirements based upon the economy and where their family situation is, but they are going to retire, and we don't have the supply coming in through our normal routes to certification to make sure that we have all the quality educators that we need in our classrooms. The other thing is, and this is one of the most disturbing facts that I've found when I've been researching alternative certification and our current certification status, but ETS just released a report a couple of months ago. The percentage of 8th grade math students on free and reduced lunch whose teachers left before the end of the year is 67%. If your math teacher leaves before the end of the year, how are you supposed to get college ready? And if our current system is so great at preparing teachers, why is it that they don't stick it out through that first year or that year to make sure that those kids can learn? That, to me, is a huge, huge problem. And yet, that fact comes out and it just doesn't even make a ripple in the news. If I'm that parent and I can't get our algebra teacher to stay, I know my kid's not going to learn algebra. Rick Hess had a great article recently on how to get the teachers we want. He also talked about the fact that we're a career-changing society and that people over 40 have held over 4 different jobs. So to expect that in our society today that everybody's going to be a teacher for life is not a reality of what we see with kids today. People are going to come into teaching for 5, 6 years. They maybe leave and go do another career and then come back into teaching. You also have professionals that go out into the workforce, find out that's not right for them, and then want to come back into teaching. So we have to have systems that are set up to do that. And 3 huge studies over the last 2 years on alternative certification. Basically, the bell curves look the same for all routes, that there is no real difference on student achievement depending on the route that you came from, whether it's alternative certification or normal certification. So the research now supports going into an alternative certification program. And Education Next took a look at what states have real alternative certification and what have faux or fake alternative certification. And that's the alternative certification where you're required to do 26, 28 hours of coursework at the same time that you're trying to start teaching. That's really not alternative, because all you have to do is take another couple of classes and you could have earned the master's anyway. When they looked at that difference, what they found is that states that had real alternative certification had higher student achievement and had a much more diverse teaching workforce. ABCTE, 22% of our teachers are teachers of color, 33% are male. You bring a more diverse teaching workforce. It is not there to replace anything else. It is not there to replace our current system. Alternative certification is there to augment the current system, because if only 7% of our graduates are earning degrees in teaching, you have to have something to replace those teachers that used to come into the workforce. And that's what alternative certification is all about. So on the next page, now that you have the stats and the citations for those statistics, let's talk about how do you change rule or law to get alternative certification. And over the last 4 years, I've become fairly good, I guess, at doing this. We've been able to have at least one state a year adopt ABCTE, and we've done it in a variety of different ways. When I first took over, Representative Sally Kern, who's here today, she brought me to Oklahoma, and I got my first lesson in the legislative route and got my rear end handed to me. Same with Representative Jane Cunningham, now Senator Jane Cunningham, who also brought me out to Missouri to also figure out how to not go anywhere with a bill, and then come back the following year and really figure out what we need to do to get a bill passed. And we have our route accepted in both of those states. And in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma House approved our bill 99 to nothing. There was no opposition to an alternative certification program in Oklahoma. The reason for that is there were so many other education reform bills that they were focused on those and said, we don't have time to worry about this. We're not as worried about alternative certification, because they were losing contracts, they were losing everything, and so they were much more focused on that. But also, the Democrats had started to hear it from their teachers in their district. There was a Democrat on the Education Committee in the House who came to me and said, I had a math teacher email me and say, I've got 5 teachers in my department. 3 of them have got to be fired, but I can't fire them because I don't have a math teacher replacement. So if you're going to get me more math teachers, I need them so I can make sure that my kids actually learn math. I just don't have the supply in math and science. And so we were able to get it done there. We were able to get it done in Missouri. The pros to legislation, as you can see there, you can get it done quickly. I've never actually seen it done quickly, except in South Carolina. We passed our bill in the first year there. It took a lot of work. There were a lot of people in favor of making sure that this happens, and so we were able to get it in the first year there. Normally, it's taken us 3 years to get a bill passed and change alternative certification legislation to allow ABCTE to enter the state. The other problem, as you all well know, is if you're legislators, is those that oppose education reforms have a couple of different tactics. They can delay, they can make it, create some sort of study. They can, if they can't do that, then what they're going to do is they're going to try to load it up with amendments that make it unworkable to implement your program. And we've had to fight that back in a number of different states. And then if it actually does pass, then maybe they can sue later on to try to not get that to come to fruition. So we've seen that it's very difficult, and there are many ways that they can derail that process. But legislative is definitely one way. In Oklahoma and Missouri, we had to go legislative because in that state, the board that approves new alternative or new certification programs is made up of College of Education people. That's like saying to Microsoft, we're going to put you in charge of all computer operating systems, and Apple has to go to apply to them to see if they can create a new operating system. It's not going to happen. The colleges of education do not want competition. In Missouri, we had over 1,000 people enroll in our program in the first year. The alternative certification program through the university system costs $6,000 a year. They lost $6 million in revenue, and that's why they were fighting us like you wouldn't believe to make sure that they did not have that to happen. Regulatory is the next way to try to do this. In Indiana right now, they're trying to open up their certification rules. In Tennessee, interestingly enough, in Tennessee, Louisiana, Colorado, and D.C., they all had sudden retirements of the director of teacher certification in those state departments, and lo and behold, all 4 states are now passing rule to open up their certification routes. That's great, and most of them have come up with really great routes, except for Louisiana, which in their alternative certification program now say that you have to have 32 hours of content preparation or pedagogy preparation, which is basically just 1 course short of a master's, a course and a half. So it's really not alternative. We're not going to Louisiana unless we can pass legislation. In Tennessee, they had great regulation that come through the Department of Ed, and then they sent it over to the state board, then they sent it over to the Department of Ed. They made the application so complex that it was going to be like a 4-volume set that we were going to have to turn in, and basically they had made it so prescriptive there was no chance to be innovative in that state. So we backed off of Tennessee, and now the department has changed and said, no, we're going to modify that. We're not going to make it that restrictive. We realized we kind of messed up there. So we'll have applications in Tennessee, Arizona, which is looking to open up their certification routes, Colorado, and D.C. this year. So there's a lot of movement in the alternative certification realm, and Indiana is also opening up their regs and will be applying there. So we've gone from 1 state a year to the potential of 5 states this year. And then real quick about our program, you can read it here because I don't want to take up everybody else's time. But we recruit, prepare, certify, and support at ABCTE. Total cost of the program is $975, so we remove barrier 1, which is cost. Then it's an independent study program with over 200 hours of content and pedagogy done on your own time online, so we remove the time barrier, which is another barrier that a lot of people say that's why they won't go into teaching, is they can't afford to take off from work, spend $6,000, and do all of this other stuff just to get in the classroom. Then we certify. We have 2 of the most rigorous tests, a pedagogy test, because we do have pedagogy, despite what the Indiana press says, because they never really want to look at our program. We do have a pedagogy exam, and we have pedagogy content in our program, and we have a subject matter exam. The pass rate on our program into the classroom is 38%. It is not a shortcut. It is not the easy route. We believe that you have to be very restrictive and selective in who you put in the classroom. Just as TFA, when they covered their statistics, it's the same thing. And the McKinsey report, which looked at the highest performing international countries, that was one of the things they came back with. A highly selective process to bring your teachers in the classroom results in much better performance of your students. That's what we believe in as well. At the end of that, we make sure that they have mentoring in the first year because they're not getting student teaching, and they have to have that interaction with a good mentor. And then at the end, then they get a full certification from the state. We have the data to back it up. You can see there. But 85% of our teachers are still in the classroom after 3 years. 85%. Through normal routes, that's around 62 to 65%. 85% of our teachers are still in the classroom after 3 years. That's a phenomenal retention rate based upon selectivity at the front end, making sure they're prepared before they go into the classroom, and then making sure they get the support. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tony Dr. Tony Bennett, who is the superintendent of Indiana schools, who is really working hard to shake things up in Indiana and make sure their students get what they need every day when they come to class.
Thank you, Dave. I just kind of want to, in some schools, when you talk about a 4th grade teacher leaving, we call that addition by subtraction in Indiana. But I want to also, we heard Governor Bush talk yesterday about blowing up the certification process. And last night as I was eating, I was thinking about my life after the superintendency, and I think what we are beginning to do is build a portfolio, hopefully, for our career after the State House, which is outplacement for ed school deans. So we in Indiana, and I need to put this in the context, because we came in January, and everything we're doing as it applies to teacher licensing or professional licensing, because our licensing reform is not just teacher licensing reform. It is professional licensing reform. It's teachers, principals, and superintendents, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. But it is all part of a strong strategic plan that's based on 90% of our students passing the state's test, 25% of our students having advanced placement or international baccalaureate or dual credit when they leave high school, and 90% of our kids graduating from high school with a meaningful high school diploma. We said we were going to do that by 2012. So the first thing we said is, do our structures in Indiana support those 3 goals? And the answer is no. We're not getting it done. So we had a very honest discussion about that. So everything starts with that. And while I'm going to talk about licensing, I want to also give you a context of some other areas that we're trying to address or have addressed in regard to the 90-25-90. Because again, Governor Bush talked yesterday about freedom, competition, and innovation. And we have a little different spin to that in Indiana. We call it freedom, competition, and accountability. are the building blocks for 90-25-90. And we want competition in every facet of education. And in Indiana, the education system is just void of competition. You know, we tell kids every day, you got to compete. You got to compete for places in college. You got to compete for post-secondary opportunities. But the adults don't compete. So we're going to insert competition everywhere. But let me just go through these. We redefined 180 days. Well, we didn't redefine it. The General Assembly in Indiana defined 180 days back in 1987, and we chose not to follow the law and basically allowed parent-teacher conferences and professional development to count as instructional days. So we did away with that. We also were the first state in the country to define a laptop computer as a textbook. So we've opened the door for one-to-one. One of our very creative superintendents, Vince Bertram, down in Evansville, rolled out 7,000 laptop computers to his high school kids. So we really believe that has been a regulation we've gotten rid of. Got rid of seat time requirements. We allowed schools to apply alternative PE credits. We are rolling out a growth model at the end of the year, or at the end of the month, to become part of an accountability system where we will grade schools A through F. We had a great legislative session. We did get a small scholarship tax credit, so we got the camel's nose inside the tent. We did get a link to student achievement, student growth, to teacher evaluations. We have 3 pilots throughout the state, actually 4 pilots throughout the state on differentiated pay based on student achievement and outcomes. And the last thing is this issue of licensing. So, I want, if you've got the handout, here it was in the back. It is based on the premise that we want to increase quality of the teachers in the state and increase flexibility for everyone in the state. So that's the framework of what you see here. And I'm not going to read those to you, but I think what we have done is said we are going to put a focus on content. We're going to put a focus on content. Now, Dave mentioned the media in Indiana, and frankly, one of the things we've learned in doing this, and I will probably be able to speak more to what is the state's role in making sure schools are able to get Top Gun teachers. And the best thing the state can do is to provide structural change. And this is our answer to structural change. So we said it's about content. If you read into this, here are really the highlights. 4 teachers, elementary teachers, 30 hours of pedagogical skills plus student teaching. That's the maximum they can have. They also have to have a content minor to be an elementary teacher. Now, the 30 hours has to include 15 hours of core content. So we have been very prescriptive regarding the need to improve what our elementary teachers know. Let me give you an example of what we face and what we've heard from our middle school principals. We have a licensing framework that's called the Elementary Generalist that basically allows people to teach K through 8 non-departmentalized. When we have to move staff around in tough economic times, many times we end up with an elementary generalist teaching a middle school math class, and they have no ability to move the needle there. Same with science. So we intend to address that. Our secondary education is pretty interesting. We are really, in essence, doing away with secondary education majors in the state of Indiana. Our proposal will be that every teacher will come out with a content area major and a minor in education that is 18 hours plus student teaching. So when Dave talked about the media, our media get it. They get it in Indiana. They're understanding that we are not substituting content for pedagogy. We're saying we are going to have a focus on content, but we also understand the need for pedagogical skills. You know, I was at a panel with one of our state universities, IU, and one of the associate deans went through this litany of skills, pedagogical skills that teachers have to have. And she basically said to me, do you deny any of those? And I said, no. What I do deny is the fact that we have to have a 3-hour course for every one of those skills. So we want to have a focus on content. We want to have a focus on flexibility. So our licensing pattern will be much more flexible for principals and superintendents. As we move up the line, we are going to enable our principals to get into the pipeline much easier. We are also doing the same thing for superintendents, allowing alternatively certified principals and superintendents, non-traditional principals and superintendents. And we've gotten some pushback there. And we've actually made a lot of headway because we asked this question: does it seem fair that Arnie Duncan, Joe Klein, and Michelle Rhee are not qualified to be superintendents in the state of Indiana? And when you frame the question that way, it has a little different feel to it. So we are really pushing very hard to be a state that puts a focus on content, produces students or teachers with the amount of pedagogy necessary to be effective, allowing alternative paths like ABCTE or others to come in and use non-traditional professionals in the classroom. Now, much of this in Indiana, and I don't know how many of you in your states have the same thing, and I would really ask, if this is a legislative issue, the legislators in the room to take a look at how you certify workplace specialists for your career and technical education centers. Because you know what? You already do this. Our best point in Indiana is we already do this. We produce certified teachers who are content area specialists to teach in career and technical education centers in the state every day. And that begs the question, are career and technical education students more important or less important than their traditional school counterparts? Because what we do in career and technical education is, if we need a masonry teacher, guess what we do? We go out and find a mason who has great interpersonal skills, has experience working with children in their church, in the community, and we get them in the school, and then we send them to a university to take pedagogy classes while they're teaching. The other thing this does is this puts teacher quality in the hands of the people who need to ensure ongoing teacher quality, and that's the building professionals. You know, the schools of education are not the keepers of teacher quality. It really should be our principals and superintendents who should be supervising teachers every day. So we have an assessment program for the first 2 years, which matches our statutes regarding teacher tenure. This will be a structural change. I know Dave will want me to talk a little bit about pushback. There's been a little. There's been a lot. And you know, we can talk about that. But I believe very sincerely that policymakers, state policymakers, have an obligation to develop structures that enable local school corporations to hire the best. Now, I know in the session following this, we're going to talk about keeping the best. You can't keep the best if you don't get the best. And in Indiana, we have this really nice company called Eli Lilly, and they're downsizing. And we have chemists and mathematicians and physicists, statisticians who are going to be leaving Lilly in the next 2 years. How great would it be to use some of those professionals in front of Indiana children? And you know what? If they can't teach, we ought to have good principals who remove them. So our entire process is based upon that. I would be remiss before I end if I didn't have you turn around. The guy standing in the back of the room is our Chief of Staff, Todd Houston. I gave you a litany of things that we're doing. There is nothing that has been done or we can do or would do without Todd. And I said this to Dave when we started. I am one of 50 state school chiefs, and I promise you I'll bet any one of them dinner and my next paycheck that I've got the best chief of staff, because we keep a lot of balls in the air and we keep our foot on the accelerator. So he would also be around later on if you have any questions, but he is absolutely the best. So with that, I'll end and turn it back over to Dave, and then we'll take questions.
Thank you. And then next we have Kevin Huffman from Teach for America, who's going to talk a little bit about what they're doing and how their program works to really create another channel to make sure that we make up for the teachers that are not coming through regular programs. Kevin?
Thanks, Dave. Good morning. So Teach for America has been around now for almost 20 years, even though I think we still have a bit of a reputation as a new kid on the block. The context for our work is the domestic achievement gap in this country, the gap that exists between low-income and high-income kids. And If you all saw the McKinsey report that came out earlier this year, it actually looked at the cost of the achievement gap nationally, both the global achievement gap and the domestic achievement gap. And it was very interesting because they tried to monetize the cost. And they found that the cost to the country of the U.S. performance vis-a-vis other higher performing nations is about $1 to $2 trillion a year. And the cost to the country of the gap between low-income and high-income kids in educational outcomes is more than $500 billion a year. So roughly the size of the stimulus bill, but we're incurring that cost year after year after year. That's just the monetary cost, to say nothing of the human cost. So Teach for America, our philosophy is that we're trying to channel the country's most promising future leaders into the field of education. We're recruiting people who did not necessarily think about teaching. We're finding them on college campuses, trying to get as many of the most talented people as possible to commit 2 years to teach in urban and rural schools across the country. We're training them, we're providing intensive ongoing professional development, and we're trying to ensure that they are highly successful with their kids. Our long-term view is that by getting so many of the country's most promising future leaders into the education profession, over the long haul, we're building a pipeline of people, many of whom will stay in education. About 2/3 of our alumni actually still work in education, but some of whom will leave and go into other leadership roles, taking with them the experience of having taught successfully in a low-income community. So our hope is that one day we would look out on a room like this, and many of the people sitting in this room would actually be alumni of the Teach for America program. To give you a sense of how things are going for us right now, last year we had about 35,000 people apply to Teach for America for about 4,000 positions. About 11% of Ivy League seniors applied to Teach for America. 20% of African American seniors in the Ivy League applied to Teach for America. And between 5 and 10% of the senior classes at more than 100 top universities across the country applied to Teach for America. I think that maybe should be a sign to everyone more broadly about alternative certification, about what happens when we go out and actively attempt to encourage people to become teachers and to enter the profession. When rather than just sort of hanging out a shingle and hoping people will come, when we go out and we actually try to say to people, this is an incredible leadership opportunity, this is an important way for you to contribute to the betterment of the country, we need you to do this. What we've found is our numbers have gone dramatically up as we have sent more people out to recruit. And there's a direct correlation between our effort and the results in people applying to the organization. We had about 40,000 one-on-one meetings on college campuses last year with college seniors. So not people showing up at information sessions, but literally sitting down one-on-one with college seniors and trying to encourage them to apply to Teach for America and join the program. Our results are quite solid in terms of student achievement as well. The two best studies that have come out on Teach for America, one by Mathematica and one by Urban Institute, have both found that students taught by Teach for America core members are learning more in a year than would typically be expected and are advancing more in a year than even veteran and certified teachers in the same schools. So we're very encouraged that that's the baseline for our work, even though we know that the kids that we're reaching are frequently so far behind that it's not enough for them to just advance a little bit more than other kids. They actually have to do a great deal of catching up. And we're also seeing significant impact of our alumni across the country. We now have more than 400 school leaders or principals across the country. The founders and leaders of many of the country's most prominent charter schools are Teach for America alumni. The KIPP network was founded by Teach for America alumni, and most of the principals in the network are alums. We have many school leaders of major urban schools who are Teach for America alumni. We have several superintendents who are Teach for America alumni, and many people in the policy world now are Teach for America alumni as well. We recently had a reception on Capitol Hill and found that we had more than 40 Teach for America alumni who were staffing congressmen and senators in education. And I would encourage many of you to think about our alumni as potential staffers for you all, because they bring an incredible energy and passion and commitment to the effort. We've grown in the last 10 years from 13 to 35 regions. We're now in more than half the states across the country, but we still are intending to grow more. So we have, I said we brought in 4,000 new teachers this year. We have about 7,500 total teachers across the country. And our hope, that's first and second year teachers, our hope is to get to the point where we have 15, 16, or 17,000 teachers across the country. And so we are interested in expansion. One of the big barriers to growth for Teach for America is the alternative certification rules and regulation framework across the country in different states. I think it's interesting as I've seen our efforts to expand into different states come up against the alternative certification rules. The thing that's sad is I do think there is a common belief across the political spectrum that we should care a lot about quality, and we should figure out how to make it challenging, how we should encourage the best people to become teachers and not just allow everyone to become a teacher. But what we've seen through alternative certification laws is too often the barriers and gates are placed in the wrong place. So in international systems of education that are highly effective, the countries will make it very challenging to actually major in education or study to become a teacher. And that's where they're putting the gate. Here, too often, it's actually anybody can sort of enter the pipeline, and then we create all of these hurdles. And the hurdles aren't based on competence or ability. The hurdles are based on people's willingness to jump through hoops. And that's really not an effective way to figure out who our best teachers should be. As we've gone around and worked on opening new sites, one of the examples that we cited, it reminds me a little of what Tony's been saying about, Secretary Duncan couldn't be a superintendent in this state. One of our alumni was the National Teacher of the Year several years ago, taught math in Anacostia in D.C. to one of the poorest neighborhoods in the country, and wound up becoming National Teacher of the Year, incredible guy. And it turns out that he actually couldn't have taught in about half of the states in the country. He just simply wouldn't have met the criteria for entry into the alternative certification programs the way they're designed. And very often that's because of prerequisite coursework requirements that people layer into their alternative certification rules and regulations. So states will have rules that say, in order to enter into alternative certification here, you have to have taken the following mix of courses. It would be fine if these requirements were data-based, if they were based on studies that showed if you take X class, then the students you teach later will advance. I think everyone can get behind any rules that are based in evidence that they will improve student performance. But far too often, these rules are based on people's somewhat random thoughts and ideas about what might make sense for a teacher to know. And I would just encourage everyone, when people come to you and say, well, we think that the certification program should require X, I would encourage everyone to ask for the evidence and the data to back it up. And by evidence and data, I mean, how does this drive student achievement? Can you show me a study or a piece of evidence that would indicate that if we put up this barrier, if we put up this hurdle, it's going to make students actually learn more in a year? Because far too often, that's not actually the case. The last thing I would say is one of the interesting things I see in DC right now through Secretary Duncan and through the Race to the Top Fund, which I'm sure all states are vigorously engaged in preparing for, is that there is actually a broad political center around education. I think education for too long has been viewed as politically polarized, and I think that's changing. I think the principles that are embedded in the Race to the Top Fund that Secretary Duncan has really been pushing are not dramatically different than many of the principles that Secretary Spellings was pushing for in the last administration. And I think increasingly we're seeing real alignment in the political middle around things like the use of data and the need to make data-driven decisions, the need for high-quality teachers and high-quality school leaders, and the need to build pipelines that facilitate getting the best people into teaching and into school leadership. The importance of focusing on turning around low-performing schools and thinking creatively about how do you turn around the lowest performing schools in the country, and in particular, how are you going to have a human capital structure and system that will make sure that you get good teachers and good school leaders to go into the schools with the highest needs. So I do think that there is an emerging political consensus around issues that maybe 10 or 15 years ago would have been viewed as trickier issues than they are today. So I think it's an exciting time. I think the Race to the Top fund and the process of preparing for applications presents an exciting opportunity for policymakers in states across the country to take some risks, to make some progress in taking on some reform issues, because at the end of the day, it could result in significant amounts of money for the states, which I think provides a fair amount of both impetus for people to move forward and also political cover as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. And the Race to the Top does have one element that says specifically alternative certification, and there has been both Arnie Duncan and President Obama specifically talk about alternative certification a lot, and we also believe that's another reason that more and more states are looking for ways to open up their alternative certification. So that's the beginning of our prepared remarks. What we'd like to do now, we have about a half hour left. We'd like to open up to questions from you all and hear what your thoughts or concerns or questions you have about alternative certification and how to get great teachers into your classrooms. Yeah, if you could step up to the mic, that would be great.
My question is for Teach for America. When you say that you go after the highest or the qualified people to go into the schools, what are the criteria that you look for in the College of Education, or not College of Education, but just the universities around the nation?
Yep. Thanks for that question. So essentially we're looking for leadership skills because it's our belief that at the end of the day, being a great teacher is not that different than being a very effective leader in any context. It's about setting important goals, investing people, the students and the families in reaching those goals, working relentlessly to pursue them, measurement and a belief in data. And two traits that we're really looking for, one is demonstrated past record of achievement in whatever endeavor, whether it's a high grade point average, whether it's leadership on a college campus in terms of running a student activity. People can demonstrate achievement in a variety of ways, but we see that people who have been achievers in the past will be achievers in the classroom as well. The second trait is perseverance and ability to overcome challenges and obstacles. We refer to it sometimes as internal locus of control. And it's our belief that in a classroom, especially in the hardest contexts, people are going to run up against enormous challenges. And there are essentially two kinds of people. There are people who look around and say, this isn't fair, and I shouldn't have to put up with this, and find all of the different reasons why these challenges exist, many of which are legitimate, but that doesn't advance the ball. And then there are people who say, these are the things that I can't control. This is what's within my control. I'm focusing on the things within my control, and I'm determined to get results regardless of the obstacles around me. And I think you can see that in the way that people talk about past challenges that they have overcome, and the people who have a real commitment to persevere in the face of challenges do better.
Thanks. Sir.
Yes, thank you. Representative Roberts from New Hampshire. This is for Dr. Bennett. I really appreciate the opportunity because it's really important that you have alternative certification, because I think I went to basically an all-white school to become a teacher. When I was taking the teaching classes, I found out, and I'm going, wait a minute, they're being patronizing. A lot of teachers are going to students want to become teachers, quote, to save the world, but they're talking about, well, we want to save the black kids, the brown kids, because you know what, they're not like us, and they really are not capable. And I'm saying, wait a minute, I'm one of 10 kids, I don't have a father, I grew up on welfare, and it's like they're talking about me, telling me I'm sitting in the same class. I'm not capable as you are. So I joined the Marine Corps, I become a Marine Colonel, I become an engineer, and I've been far successful of the kids that graduated with me. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, I taught for a year. But then I go back to the same school and try to get certified. It's like, sorry, no, you got to do this, you got to do that. And I'm saying, wait a minute, I taught a long time in the Marine Corps, I was really successful, but nope, you can't be a teacher because you don't meet these state requirements. So I think it's so important, if we want to bring up minority student level, that we bring people who understand and have those intangibles, that know that some of the kids, when they come to school, that's the safest place they're going to be all day.
That's a great point. And you know, I cannot support that any more than you did. What you said was one of the things that came to us during our process. We had a number of directors of diversity say, you are doing more to open up alternative paths to outstanding role models, minority role models for our students than has ever been done before. And you know, my attitude, if you were a Marine Colonel, hell, you shouldn't be a teacher, you should be a school principal or superintendent. You know, so we should be, again, our position is we should make the opportunities available for school corporations to hire the type of people they need to move the needle, be it a superintendent, a principal, or a teacher. So, and I also want to talk a little bit about teacher quality as it applies to the principals, because we've heard this argument and you will hear it. Can a non-traditional principal evaluate a teacher? Now, how many of you would ask that question intuitively? Okay? In Indiana, most of our teachers are given, and I say most, over 90% of our teachers are given marks that they exceed expectations. Now think about that. That's by the traditionally trained principals who are complaining about teacher quality. So my point is, maybe what we need is a new breed of administrators who can evaluate people objectively. Because I think if you look at your structures in your states, and again, from a state perspective, I'm no longer a local school superintendent, I now have to look at state structures. Your structures in your state very well may look like teachers become principals, principals become assistant superintendents, assistant superintendents become superintendents. Now that structure tends to breed a little bit of familiarity, leads to complacency. And so we have to kind of change that. And again, I very much appreciate your point, and I believe me, that'll be used again in Indiana.
Hi, I'm Pat Garofalo. I'm a state rep from Minnesota. Question for Mr. Huffman. In terms of Teach for America, states where you've had successes and where you've seen barriers and obstacles, can you give us some ideas for removing barriers and obstacles to increase your success in those states, and maybe some legislative successes you've had in other states?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. And we're excited to have opened our Minnesota site for the first time this year, which is exciting. It was a long time coming. So one thing is the question of how do you demonstrate competence in particular subject matter, and I think too often states require that people demonstrate competence based on the number of credit hours that they've taken in something, when that may be one way of doing it, and another way of doing it might be through an exam that tests how much somebody knows. So in the case of our National Teacher of the Year, he had majored in government at Princeton, but he had 800 on his math SATs, and he wanted to teach middle school math, and he couldn't teach math in most places because they said you had to have taken, 18 credit hours of math as an undergraduate or whatever the case may be. But when he was able to prove competence by slamming through the subject matter test, then that opened the door for him. So I think it's a question of thinking creatively both about the prerequisite requirements, which can bar a lot of people who would be really good from coming in, and then also what do people have to do in order to become certified once they're in. So there's before they enter the program and then after they enter the program. After they enter the program, how many classes do they have to take? Can they do it while they're actually teaching? Is it viable? Are the classes that they're taking actually tied to things that will make them better as teachers, or are they just trying to check off certain things that meet certain requirements? I think the quality of coursework that our people take towards certification while they're teaching varies dramatically across the country. There's some places where people are literally in classes 2 nights and 1 Saturday a week taking courses that actually don't tie directly to their teaching. That not only is not helpful, it's discouraging, it keeps people from coming in, and then it distracts them from actually focusing on lesson planning. So you want coursework framework to become certified that is truly based on student learning and not just based on trying to satisfy people's conceptions of how many hours people should be in a classroom.
One of the studies listed on there actually talked about that people going through alternative certification programs that had a lot of coursework to complete in their first 2 years actually performed worse than alternatively certified teachers that did not have to do the coursework. So when you take away, if anybody's taught, it's physically and mentally exhausting every day, and now you have to go sit in class 2 nights a week, that's not a recipe for really getting somebody to be excited about teaching and focus on teaching. So, and there's a study now that backs that up, that's not the best way to do this.
Let me jump in, too, because you asked about legislative kind of remedies. One of the things we did at the Indiana Department of Education when we came in was we invested in Teach for America as a state agency. Now, we did that because when we walked in, we had 329 employees at the Indiana Department of Education, and today we have 230. So what we said was we can pay bureaucrats to sit in Indianapolis, or we can invest in instructional quality. So we use the savings to invest in the Wilson Fellows. We use the savings to invest in Teach for America, and we have also used the savings to invest in differentiated pay models. So I think for the legislators out there, some of this you need to, I always say you can tell a person's priorities by looking at their checkbook and their calendar. Well, look at the checkbook and the calendar of your Department of Ed and make sure you're putting your time and money in instructional quality and instructional leadership.
Yes, ma'am.
My name is Linda Benware, and I just retired after being a high school principal for 11 years and was strongly in support of alternative education because I love the dimension that the individuals that would bring to the school that were coming to education from a different point of view. Was it Saba or
Yes.
Saba?
Yes.
Saba. I was very impressed with your presentation. I'd like a little bit more elaboration on the last element, and that would be the support. That's what I found these teachers needed tremendously. We would create one within our own school, and it was probably the most effective. But from any of the other sources that the teachers came to us with alternative certification, there was no support program that tagged onto that. So could you tell us a little bit more about your support program?
And that's been a primary focus as I've come on over the last 4 years. In many of the states where we operate, well, in all the states except for New Hampshire, which passed a bill or passed our program really, really early on, there was a 2-step licensing process. And this is really to protect the principals and make sure they're getting the best. And the first step is they go through our or probably 3-step. The first step is they go through our program, they get approved, then they enter the classroom and they get a mentor on some sort of provisional or first step license, and then they have to go through a mentoring program that's supplied by the school district. In some states, they have not been happy with their mentoring program, so they've opted to use our mentoring program. And our mentoring program is developed using the class observation system from the University of Virginia, which looks at many of the different elements in teaching and makes sure that that teacher is actually modeling that behavior day in, day out in the classroom. So somebody actually physically goes in the classroom, makes sure that that person is modeling behavior. If they're lacking in that behavior, then there is a video online. They can just click on that particular element. So if they're struggling with differentiated instruction, they click on that, and they can watch a teacher modeling that behavior, and they can come in and then do that the next day. So there's 6 observations in this program where they're going through and making sure that they actually are doing the things that they're supposed to do. Also, that allows us, we talked a little bit about competency-based or hours-based alternative certification requirements at the state level. For us, that's a great way to make sure that we're meeting all of the competency requirements for that particular state. So Colorado, in their application, we have to demonstrate that our teachers are looking at or making sure they're doing dropout prevention, making sure they're using technology in the classroom. Well, rather than develop something new for every state, we're able to add those competencies into that mentoring to make sure that we're meeting every state's requirements, because each state is different, and we do appreciate that and want to make sure that we meet that. So we do have that mentoring program. We've augmented our mentoring program and continue to improve that support because we've seen that lacking in other districts. Not all the districts are as fortunate as you. The other big issue that we're seeing right now in school districts across the country is that's one of the first things that's starting to get cut. As budgets get lean, people are looking for ways to cut, and mentoring may be one of those things on the chopping block. We actually, in our program, the candidate pays for their mentoring program with half going to the mentor and half going to us to administer it. So it is a cost savings to the school districts that use us as well. Yes, ma'am.
Marilyn Avila, House of Representatives of North Carolina. I'm curious in terms of with the Teach for America and also the alternative programs bringing in sort of non-education people, has that had an impact on the education schools in the way they prepare people, or are they sort of doing it on their own, or has what y'all are doing kind of opened their eyes to maybe shifting how they prepare people to go into the classroom?
We can only hope.
You want to talk about Arizona?
No, I mean that. What we're trying to do, let's go back to the idea of competition. I mean, that's really what we're trying to do is we actually went to our superintendents and principals associations and said, why don't you come up with alternative paths for superintendents and principals? Get with your Indiana school business officials, Indiana School Board Association, come up with an alternative path. We'll get it approved through the professional standards. We want competition so the education schools change what they're doing. And there is competition in the system. Because if there is competition on professional preparation, and we insert competition in every aspect of education, our kids will benefit. So we hope that that's the case.
Just one. So first, to answer your question, in most places, no. And in some places, we're seeing some interest in working together and trying to figure out different models. One thing I think that is important that is embedded in the Race to the Top Fund is they talk about the need for states to have a plan that shows how they will measure teacher providers across the state. Any provider that brings in, I want to say it's 20 teachers a year or more into the state, should be measured on the basis of the student achievement gains of the students taught by graduates of that program. So that they do that in Louisiana now. They've put that study out 2 years in a row. And I know that they're working on one in North Carolina out of the University of North Carolina right now. But I think that's really important over time, that there should be a spotlight on how well do your graduates do in advancing student learning, regardless of where you come from. I mean, there are some good alternative certification programs, and there are some bad alternative certification programs, and there's some great traditional schools of education and some bad ones. And I think what's important is to stop this sort of fighting about alternate route versus traditional route, but it would be great to just actually have studies state by state by state by state that say, you know, these universities are doing a great job. And these alt routes are doing a great job, and these ones are doing a less good job. And the barometer for this is how much do students gain in a year when they have one of these graduates in the program. So hopefully we're going to see a lot more of that.
And also, one other thing, our program is an independent study program. I mean, you're not going to classes, there's not the discipline of doing that, and that is definitely not for everyone. So you still need these other routes. You still need the alternate route or the master's degree programs, because there are people that absolutely that is the best route for them. So by having different routes, it's not whether one is better than the other, but in order to attract all the talent we need, we've got to have ways for people to go where it's going to be best for them.
Thank you.
Ginger Tenney, Executive Director for Professional Outcome Educators. What I'm hearing you say is that the current system, the way we prepare teachers, is really not worth much. And I think that we tend to blame teachers, but teachers are paying for an education to prepare them to teach. You can't teach what you don't know. And so obviously when we follow the roots, there is a problem at the colleges of education. My question to you is twofold. One, have any of you found the very best preparation for teachers in any college? And two, this is for Teach for America. The leaders that you found that you have placed in the schools, do you find them leaving for lack of income, or does that play a role at all?
I'll answer the second first. The income is not really a big piece of it. When people leave, they leave for lack of opportunity for advancement, for lack of a logical next step. But we don't see people leaving to make more money. And in fact, I used to manage development and fundraising at Teach for America, and our alumni aren't making a lot of money. I can tell you that. Most of the people who leave teaching either go into other positions in education, so they go into school leadership or counseling or other positions in education, or they go into government or social sector where they're also not making that much money, but they're going to places where they feel like they can be recognized as a leader. And I think one of the challenges that people have in teaching is they don't always see what is there for them after 5 years, after 10 years. Are they going to be able to be a mentor teacher? Are they going to be able to run a department? Are they going to be able to make curricular decisions? What are the next steps? And so I think that's an important piece.
And I think we're not saying that absolutely the entire education system is trash. There are definitely good schools out there, and schools are revamping their systems. Florida State just put a practicum much earlier in the process to make sure that kids that wanted to go into teaching figured out in their sophomore year that really teaching is for them, rather than the practicum in the last semester and then kids going, oh my God, this is a disaster, I'm a horrible teacher, and then still going into teaching because they already wasted 4 years doing that. Lindenwood University in Missouri actually guarantees their teachers, and they will provide free professional development to any principal that feels that their teacher is lacking in a certain area. They'll actually come out and do professional development for those teachers. So there are people, and Arizona State has totally revamped their teachers because they were putting Teach for America people through, and the class surveys at the end of the class were so I was going to say horrible, so I'll say horrible, that they decided, wow, we've got to change this. These kids are saying they're not getting what they need. So there are some universities that are being much more customer-driven, that are trying to figure out ways to create better programs. It's just, as Dr. Bennett would say, they're just taking a long time, and we don't have time to wait. And at the same time, they're not going out and recruiting the best and the brightest to come into these programs. You have to have full-time recruitment teams. Bonnie Zuckerman is in the back. She's our recruiter here for ABCTE. We have a staff of 7 people that's all they do. They go out there and try to find career changers who want to become teachers. It's a battle every single day. So universities sitting and hoping that somebody's going to come into their program is not going to get you the best people in the program.
The other thing I guess I would have to say about that is, again, I want to echo what Dave said. There are some great schools. In Indiana, we have Marion University, which is a small private college in the city. They have totally turned their education program inside out, and they are meeting the needs of a ton of schools and a ton of potential teachers. So, this is an issue where I think education has kind of done this in terms of who's responsible for teacher quality. Administrators are always kind of, well, when they come out of the ed school, they're pretty well ready to teach. And the ed schools are saying, well, we turn out these, and we just have to develop a system that enables top talent to get into our schools. And anything less than that's just unacceptable. So we are going to push very hard in Indiana for the ed schools to reform themselves. We said what Kevin said. I said at the panel with our IU folks. I cited Louisiana and said, maybe what we need to do is rank our schools of education from first to worst every year. Maybe then people would reform themselves.
Yes, sir.
Yes. My name is Daniel Woodring, and I actually had the pleasure of trying to keep Jeb Bush out of trouble in Florida for a number of years when we did all the education reform legally and had a lot of challenges. My question is a little more radical, and it's the question of why are we looking at certification? And the reason I would say that is what we know is, and this is McKinsey and other studies, but we can identify good teachers by about year 4, wherever they come from. And the data shows in Florida, for example, that if you have a teacher at year 4, they pretty much stay at that level as far as, and I'm talking about student results, value-added results, for the rest of their career. There's actually what we call the burnout phase at about probably year 18, starts to dip down a little bit. And so my question is, I'm not hearing a lot of correlation between any of the certification on the front end. In other words, what exams are we giving? What actual courses have we ever shown have any effect in the classroom on the front end? Should we just have a basic, you've gotten a degree, you pass your criminal background checks, and then we let you in and we sort it out 3-4 years down the road?
Well, and I hear that a lot because, there's a lot of people obviously that would just soon do away with certification and licensing and saying, wait a minute, this is ridiculous. Now, but I think the point that Michelle made at breakfast this morning is the point that's right on there. If you don't have some sort of training and some sort of gate, because like I said, we only pass 38% through our program, and I can guarantee you that if we had some of our operations people that talk to our candidates that don't succeed, they're very happy that they don't succeed because they should not be in the classroom. Now, they believe they should be in the classroom, and they believe they have something to offer. Because I am a math expert, I'm going to be able to go in that classroom and just the math will flow from me into you. They don't realize that you have to do lesson plans. They don't realize you have to deal with parents and set up assessments and understand all of the intricacies of dealing with students on a daily basis. And until they realize that, they're going to fail when they first get in there. If you look at some of the failure rates of some of the teachers that just come right out, and I hate these alternative programs where anybody can come off the street, we're going to give you a classroom, and then we're going to train you at night. And that's like the worst case of what Michelle was talking about, where we're going to provide you professional development at night. And I'm sorry that the first 3 years of kids that got you as a teacher, we're sorry we had to throw away your future, but we wanted to make sure that we could get this person in or not in. So I understand what you're saying, but I believe there has to be a very restrictive gateway before you get in there, because a lot of these career changers that I've seen that want to come to teaching do not belong in teaching, and we're keeping them out of the classroom, and we're doing a huge favor to those principals and those students. But I'm a little passionate about that.
My name is Christine Ryle. I've been a professor in a community college for over 25 years, and I'm now training teachers in an experiment in the state of Florida that we are initiating. We have 28 community colleges. We have made 9 of those an interim label called a state college. So I offer to some of you legislators the army of people that you have out in the community college system. We are only training critical needs teachers, and we are training math, upper school and middle school, science, middle and upper school, and special education. We are offering a 4-year education degree at a greatly reduced cost. I'm a product of schools of education. I know what they do well, and I know what they waste time doing. I applaud all of the alt-cert efforts. On our community college campus, we have an alternative education program where we certify career changers. We have a traditional ed program where students transfer. But now we have in place a program that will certify in a 4-year cost-effective producing someone to earn $30,000 a year without getting a master's degree and being disappointed that you're not going to make a lot of money. And I offer that as an army of people who are out there ready, willing, and able to accept some reform, whereas schools of ed at the university level are very resistant to change.
Florida right now receives over 50% of their new teachers through alternative routes. So you've got the community college route. They allow each one of the school districts to come up with their own alternative route. You've got ABCT there. You've got the New Teacher Project there. You've got Teach for America there. So what you can do is just open it up. So rather than just totally do away with it, there's really no excuse in Florida for somebody not becoming a teacher, because there is definitely a route that's going to meet your needs and meet the needs of those students to make sure that they're getting a great teacher. So Florida is definitely one of the models, and if you look at their student achievement, which I believe if you go to the session today with Governor Bush, when he talks about closing the achievement gap in student achievement, the reforms to their certification routes was one of those big things that made sure that they could have all the talent they needed, and they've got all of those routes in place right now, and over 50% of new teachers coming through alternative certification. I'm getting the signal that don't forget to fill out your evaluations. Let's have a round of applause for our panel. I hope you enjoy this. Those are great questions, and for those states that don't have real alternative certification, give us a call and we'll make sure that you get it next year.